The stewardship, I just want to, before I talk about details, any of the details of finances, I just wanted to just remind us that we're in the stewardship season. The theme this year, God the Giver. God the Giver of all good gifts. And so I hasten to add, stewardship is not just about money. Please remember that. It's about everything. The more common way in which we sometimes make the distinction that it's about more than money is we sometimes talk about stewardship as being about what we do with our time and our talents as well as our treasure. I actually kind of hate that trifecta of time, talent, and treasure, though I know it's the common one, and I understand why it's enjoyed. I kind of hate it for a couple of reasons. Because when we're talking about stewardship this time of year, when we talk about time and talents and treasure, and I think it gives some folks an easy dodge. Well, I don't want to give much money, but I can give some time and talent. And I appreciate that. We need those gifts, and we need the financial support as well. So I don't want to give you people an easy dodge. The other reason I don't like it is because it becomes so trite over time that we, I think, limit ourselves now to thinking about the 3 T's instead of thinking about stewardship in a really global sense. So, for example, stewardship of God's creation. That's stewardship. What we do with this planet Earth, this, as it says in the Eucharistic Prayer, see, this fragile Earth, our island home. That's a stewardship theme, and it's not just the current politically correct. We're working on starting the process to revise the prayer book. This prayer book that we're currently using has been around for more than 40 years now. It was first proposed in 73 and formally ratified in 1976. We've been using this prayer book for more than 40 years. And we were talking 40 plus years ago about the need to take care of this fragile earth, our island home, when the need didn't seem quite so urgent or so politically charged as it often is in our debate. So creation is an aspect of stewardship. Stewardship of relationships. I invite you to think about it. You've been given relationships with family, with friends. That's something for you to care for. But just expand our consciousness of what stewardship really is. There's on the bulletin board over there, you'll see lots of little stuff just to prompt you to think about stewardship. There's a quote attributed to John Wesley there. I think I can almost read it from here. Do all you can. Do all the good you can to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Well, that's stewardship. What else is that but stewardship? So stewardship is bigger than money, not just money. Stewardship committee, these individuals, Rusty's on the committee, along with Gail, who chairs it, Bill, and Janet Stevens, and Joan Wellman. I'm told you're on the committee, Joan. Joan's going, I'm on the committee? Yes, you are. Actually, Joan, you convened the meeting a month ago or so that made sure we were right on track with our calendar. So that makes you a member of the committee. And then we have this lovely quote from Desmond Tutu from his book, In God's Hands. This is a God who intervenes on our behalf, not because we deserve it, but because God's love is freely given. It is grace. It is not earned. It cannot be earned. It does not be earned. So we remember this right from the beginning. God the giver, who gives us all good gifts. Bringing us up to speed. I'm told, I wasn't here 2 years ago. I'm told that this is the first in a 3-year cycle of programs by a group called TENS, the Episcopal Network for Stewardship, TENS. And 2 years ago, 2013, you were planting seeds. And the metaphor works because 2 years ago, of course, you were just starting to pick up the pieces after the arson fires. I think 2 years ago, you're probably still at St. Francis, having worship services there. Roy was the interim here, and you were just kind of beginning again, so you're planting seeds. And then last year, you were doing this program before I got here. I got here mid-October a year ago, so you were already doing this program then. You were seeing some things come together. You were worshiping in St. Helens Hall by then. The building here was going well, but frustratingly slow. The harvest. The trajectory or logic of the program. So, the rest of what I want to talk to you about today is finances. Bill and I have been talking, and Jan has been helping, and together we've come up with some numbers to share with you, just so you can kind of see what's what. First of all, before I get down into the details, I just want to say a couple of things. The vestry has one of its primary functions, as I interpret this thing, is stewardship. In the canons of the church, it said that the vestry is basically responsible for the building and for the finances, for making sure there are prayer books in church and all those sorts of things. And you can think about that as just bucks and buildings, or you can think about that as stewardship. What do we have, and what are we supposed to do with it? Which is just another way of saying the same thing. So it's the responsibility of the vestry. The vestry is responsible for raising the money of the church and for spending it. Nobody else. And we have a finance committee, which has been renewed in the last year. And Bill, as treasurer, presides at their monthly meetings. They go over things in greater detail. They've been working hard to create policies and to establish some principles for how things happen here. And so the finance committee is working. They serve as, if you will, an advisory committee to the vestry. They don't get to spend money, but they get to suggest how the vestry should make such decisions. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Primary concerns when you're talking about finances, this will be true in business or not-for-profit. What assets do you have, and what's your regular ongoing budget? Income and expenses, making sure those things kind of match up. What? What just happened?
Could you not know?
Oh, I hit the escape button. What happens if I hit? Oh. Sorry. Guess where I'm going to start?
People.
People.
Oh, good.
That's our first. It's like she knows me.
And they give time, talent, and
Now I'm kind of right back with time, talent, treasure. This was December 2nd last year, our first Sunday back at Trinity Hall, and it's just a good picture of a lot of people there. That's our best asset. And as we more conventionally describe them, it's going to be building and money. That's what we have as we more conventionally describe them. End of the day, over $3 million in assets as we've counted them. It sounds really, really good. And it is. It's a lot. Though I point out that the first line on that is the bulk of it already. It's $2 million right there is real estate and other capital, stuff we have here. And here's the sobering lesson if you don't know it. We can't do anything with that. We cannot sell it. We cannot leverage it to borrow money against it. Technically we can, but the procedures are such that we really can't. There are ways that we could sell it, but in this diocese, if we sell, say, St. Helens Hall across the way, if we sell that property, money goes straight to the diocese. Well, there's not much of an incentive for us to sell that at that point. If we wanted to take out a loan for some reason, there's a process for doing so, which requires at the end of the day that we get permission from the bishop and standing committee. And they don't tend to give permission to borrow money against your assets easily, and for good reason. So we have almost $2 million in assets, and who knows what it's really worth. It doesn't really matter, because we can't really do anything with it. But we have a great building here. That's the upside of the fires. As painful as it was for all of you, and again, I wasn't here, so I don't know firsthand how painful that was. But as painful as that was, at the end of the day, we have a really good building here, and next door too, with all the rebuilding. $270,000 in change as of the end of August. Family kitchen money. Now, Trinity oversees that, but that money is family kitchen money. It was raised by Family Kitchen Board to support Family Kitchen ministry, and we couldn't use it for anything else if we wanted to. not without running afoul of, at the very least, everything that would make us morally scrupulous, but probably also legally liable as well. So we really can't touch that 270,000. Condega shows 3,600 and change. I'll note the asterisk because what I want to tell you is that the Condega auction, which was held not in August but in September, they netted just about 15,000. So that was a good auction. So they'll have something closer to 18, maybe even closer to $19,000 at the end of September. But again, it doesn't help the church broadly. It helps a very specific ministry that the church supports. And we couldn't use that money for anything else if we wanted to either, because it was given for one particular project to support what we're doing in Condega. There's a trust, and this is the single largest identified trust that we cannot touch. That's the Monahan Trust, which was given and established to support outreach ministries. And so it generates income. The principal can't be touched. The income can be used, but only to support outreach. So we start out with all of those things, separated out from the total of $3 million plus. And at the end of the day, everything else we own is $822,000. Yeah, 823, let's round it off. But that doesn't tell this whole story, because we don't have $822,000 in the bank that we can just spend tomorrow. So here's just a quick allocation. The larger part, 3/4 of the wedge, is all the stuff I just outlined from here on up. And only this quarter here, 26%, as we measure it, is at 822,000. Or to look at it that way. Okay, same thing. Of that $823,000, this is how it falls out. And I have to allow right now that these numbers are pretty good, but even so, I'm going to gloss over some of the details, because I tell you the details are detailed. Painfully so at some time. We have $300,000+ between building funds and fire insurance settlement funds, which is great to start with. Sometimes people have given straight to the building fund because they wanted to support some particular project. I think I got the columbarium fund in here as well, which has just a small surplus right now. But we can't use it for general operations. If it's a gift with those particular conditions applied, we have to honor those. We also have insurance settlement in here as well. We're told, our best guess, because Tom Lowry and others have been doing some work, our best guess is we have maybe something in the neighborhood of $130,000 worth of deferred maintenance issues, primarily at St. Helens Hall. The furnace that's in the sanctuary, it's old. And there are those who are surprised it still works at all. And getting parts to fix it are well nigh impossible. So we know we're going to have to replace that furnace probably sooner rather than later, probably before the winter gets on in earnest this year. Otherwise, we're going to be in trouble. That building is heated by other sets of furnaces, which are a little bit newer, but not much. So I think there are 3 other furnaces in the other part of the building. So 1 furnace for the sanctuary, 3 other for the rest of the building, all of which need to be repaired, replaced. There are plans to do some work with doors, already scheduled and approved. It's just waiting to get done. Sidewalks, if you've walked outside the sidewalks out there, you'll see there are some tripping hazards there. Not a good plan. But round numbers, about $130,000 of identified deferred maintenance. Leave it at that. Of the fire insurance settlement, we think we're all done. They gave us a final check, we signed off on it. We think it's all done, but we're just a little bit careful right now. We don't want to spend all the money that the insurance company has given us just yet, just in case they come back and say, we gave you $4 million over the course of a couple to 3 years. Can we see exactly where you spent that? So we want to be a little bit careful not to simply spend money we have because we want to when we know we need to be careful. And then, of course, you need to have something in something like a building fund, because even though everything here is pretty new, you never know quite what might go wrong. And the moment, God forbid, these sprinkler heads spring a leak, and the insurance company says, we're not going to pay you all of that, that's the moment where we're going to really be glad we had something in the bank. So you need to have something in the bank for those kinds of things. So $313,000, maybe $100,000 of that is something that we could comfortably begin thinking about spending, maybe. But we want to be careful. Memorial funds, right now, as of the end of August, about $24,000 in memorial funds, and those are somewhat fluid. There's a feeling you don't want to spend money that have been given as memorials lightly. You don't probably want to pay the utility bill on that. You want to do something that has some lasting significance. Not have to, but you probably want to. So that's not generally likely to be available. And then there's a host of designated and outreach funds, some of them expressly for outreach, other designated funds, gifts that have come in. And we've had a couple of sizable ones. $250,000 came in from the estate of Ann Fari earlier this year. There are conditions on that, and we don't yet have the documentation from the lawyers. We aren't going to spend that money aside from the conditions which were provided to us. Again, morally nor legally can we do that. And as Bill mentioned in his article in the newsletter this month, we're pretty hard to have controls on this, so we don't just spend money that's not really ours to spend as we want to. If we received a gift, I think the Fari money, half of that is intended to be for outreach, and I heard once half of that for building, but we don't have the documentation yet. So until we get it, we're not going to even think about touching it. Emily Moore's estate left us a bequest, considerably less, but still significant. That's in there. That didn't have conditions, but again, we don't just spend it lightly without some consideration of what her intent might have been, her desires might have been, but it's ultimately up to the vestry to make some decisions about that. And some other gifts as well. And then a lot of things are designated. I mean, and a lot of them are relatively small. Altar flowers. When someone signs up over there and makes a donation to support the altar flowers, it goes into the altar flower fund. And we're not going to spend it on wine for communion. It's going to be spent for altar flowers. And on down the line. There's just a whole host of things, and I'm glossing over that. Some of that the vestry can probably reallocate, but really relatively little. Most of that's pretty strictly controlled. And that leaves us then at the end of the day really with money that we are free to spend, the vestry, about $118,000. Which, when you start with $3 million, isn't that much of all we have. And we kind of want to have some, it's our safety net for the congregation. If nobody gave the church another nickel for the rest of the year, that would just about get us through the end of the year. Thankfully, I don't anticipate that scenario, but you want to have a little something in the bank. And we're also scheduled to dip into those reserve funds this year and at least for the next couple of years, because we anticipate some budget shortfalls for the next short term. I mean, just make it smaller. Okay, so that was, yes sir?
Back to those funds that are just, we can't spend until we get authorization. Are they sitting somewhere to get interest?
We don't really have the wherewithal to do much. I mean, there's earnings for those right now. We're working on that. That's the next step for the Finance Committee, which has really gotten and running this year and is doing a good job. But there's more work to be done. There's no question. But in the meantime, CDs and the like, so minimal earnings. So, annual budget, income and expenses. Last year's program had this kind of a graphic instead of the God the Giver graphic, which we used earlier. Walking the way, and at the end of it, we had 144 pledging units, total of $296,000 and change, $297,000 pledged. It included some new pledges, some increase in pledges, some that held the same, and a few, relatively, who had to decrease. And this was the budget. Rusty, I trust this looks somewhat familiar. because this is the budget that we presented at the annual meeting and was approved at the annual meeting. So that's just showing some historical stuff, where we first started with our budget plan for 2015 and where we ended up. So we went from actual income in 2014 of 361 to a projection of $424,000 this year. To get there required a little bit of an increase in pledge, a significant increase in plate income anticipated. It includes a special gift that we received early in the year before the annual meeting, after the 1st of January, but before the annual meeting, so we knew we had that in the bank. And it included some other funds. This includes a transfer from the foundation, which was significantly more than they had done in prior years. It included a transfer from some reserve funds that we already had, and maybe a little bit more, but pretty much all identified monies that we had, that we knew we had this additional income coming in. And it still required a commitment to raise $15,000 above and beyond everything else up there sometime in the course of 2015. And I haven't gotten there, but it has a $28,000 deficit still at the end of the day. Yes, ma'am?
How do you budget for the plate?
Mostly it's historical stuff and a little bit of a guess. So they look at how plate giving has come in over the years, anticipate based on trends and everything else what you might expect that year. And I think in the case of this year, they said, and with all the excitement of moving back into Trinity and having some stability and everything else, we might reasonably expect that we would do better than we would otherwise project. So I think all of those factors came in. Is that fair, Rusty? Bill?
Doesn't that include the sustained people who do not pledge? Doesn't that figure contain
Yes.
that?
Yes, and so there are some people who don't pledge but historically give. Yeah, so that's part of the historical pattern, right? So that's just a breakdown so you can see. And what you see is 3/4 of it, 76% here. That's pledge income. Even borrowing against some reserves and other sorts of things as we did this current year, 3/4 of our projected income for the year is from pledge. And here's where we are. As of the end of September, now those are somewhat newer dates than the August dates I had before, so 3/4 of the way through the year, pledge income, probably pretty close to 3/4, which I take to be really good because frankly, I would expect that we do better in the last quarter than we do in the first 3/4 of the year. That's just historically how churches go. Plate income, it's probably not quite 3/4, but again, plate income often has a bit more of a spike at the end of the year than does the other parts of the income streams. Special income, 19,339. I kind of knew what that was going to be. That was a given. Other, a little bit under. I don't know if there's going to be any chance to make that up, but you know, these are budgets. These aren't hard and fast numbers anyhow. And additional, Summertime and the Giving is Easy challenge was offered to us without anybody actually even going out and soliciting the interest. Somebody came up to me and said, I'd like to do something. I recognize where we are. I know we're going to do something. How about if I gave $5,000 if others would match it? And I said, well, I'll put it out there and see what happens. And the Giving is Easy campaign. And we received not just $5,000 additional dollars to match it, but we received $88.75 to match the $5,000. Come up with that number there. So at the end of September, out of a projected budget of $396, we're at $304. That's probably about where we want to be. I'd like to be better. No, want to be isn't the right answer. Probably where we expect it to be, if we're going to be holding with their budget. And 74% is the same pie chart essentially, is what I already showed you. Other side expenses. This was, again, this is a look back at 2014. Rusty, I trust that this looks somewhat familiar. We kind of put some numbers in some different categories a little bit, but it still shows the picture. So 2014 budgeted, showing us to spend $350,000 and change, and we actually came in under budget in 2014. A lot of things changed. We didn't get into Trinity Hall as early in the year as we had once expected, so our utility bills, for example, didn't pick up here as early as we had feared. You also didn't have your rector here as early in the year as you expected, so you didn't have to pay for a full-time priest and all the other stuff that goes with that. as early in the year last year as you expected. I think those are the principal areas where you saw differences. And then this is what was budgeted for 2015. So again, actual for 2014 and budgeted for 2015. Big step up. Principally clergy, that's not just salary. You don't really pay me that much, but you do pay me well, and you pay for a full-time priest, and you pay for insurance, and I gotta tell you, church insurance is expensive. It's expensive everywhere. Church insurance tends to be a little bit more expensive because the personnel pool is older than the general workforce. See you, Rusty, thanks. So you pay a little bit more for church insurance than you would for other insurance, arguably. Pensions in there, expenses are in there. It's the fully loaded cost of everything. If I'm not here, you have to pay for a supply priest to come in, and that's in there too. That's relatively small, but still, it's all in there under clergy. Admin and general office also includes a lot of personnel costs in there because that's not the line for which you pay Jan. We pay Jan. Property, out of that is not just the cost of the lights and everything associated with the property, replacing light bulbs and such would come out of here. It's also paying for Mark and all he does around here. Notice a net figure, so we do get offsets from various groups. Family Kitchen paying the single largest one. Family Kitchen, the board actually reimburses us for the costs of their using that space. So we have an offset against our property costs. The AA groups pay us a little bit to help cover our costs. Occasionally there's an event that happens at Brooks Hall, and they pay us a little something to help offset our costs. So we do get a little bit back, and so it's a net figure, not a gross figure. Music includes what we pay for our musicians, for Susan as director of the music program. The little bit that Betsy and Dawn get, they do it largely as gifts to the parish, but they still get something for it. So that's in there too. So this whole section here, has a lot of personnel costs, which you can't do much about, unless you're going to make some really hard decisions to cut personnel. Those are painful in all sorts of ways. And worship, that's relatively modest. Family ministries, once there was somebody working part-time in that area, not right now, there's still program stuff that happens. Parish development and life, again, relatively modest numbers down here. And then down here, assessment and outreach. And this is a judgment call about how you consider the assessment. I think of the assessment very much as outreach, because we're obliged to pay a percentage of our income that's used for operations, to support operations. We're obliged to pay an assessment on that to support the work of the broader church. We send it to the Episcopal Diocese of Eastern Oregon. It pays for the salaries and the programs that are supported by that. It helps indirectly then support other congregations across the diocese. Some of that goes to support the Episcopal Church, which supports the administration of the Episcopal Church as a denomination, as well as some of the work that goes on all over the world, because we're members of that. So in my estimation, I think that that's really part of our outreach, is the ways in which we help support the bigger church, not just the local church. And outreach, there are some designated funds by policy. We pay 1% of our net income. It's a slightly different number, but we pay 1% just for outreach, as a commitment to doing more than just supporting our own congregational stuff. Okay? So, but the net upshot of that is just a really big step up from one year to the next. And that's a breakdown. And here's where we are as of September 2015. And again, like before, it's pretty close to 3/4 at the bottom, at the end of the day. And it's probably pretty close to that in a lot of the areas too, as one would expect. So nothing terribly noteworthy there, except to say we're pretty much on track. And it's the same breakdown again. It doesn't. Okay. And so at the end of September, Note, at the end of the year, we expected to have a deficit of 28,000. At the end of September, our deficit is a little under 13,000. I actually think that's a good number.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised to see that number shrink before the end of the year, much closer to zero. Because we expect to be running deficits through the summer. And we expect, typically, in a normal church budget, I can't say ours, because I don't know ours well enough yet, but in a normal church budget, you expect to be entering September with a deficit, and by the end of the year, seeing it turn around to balance, if you've done your budgeting well. So if our deficit is actually less than $28,000 at this point, then I would hope, let's put it that way, I don't necessarily expect, but I would hope it might actually shrink more before the end of the year. So, that's where we are. Stewardship, not just about money, but not money either. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because I showed you where the money comes from. It comes from you and them and everybody else who supports this congregation. I thank you for your support in the past. As I mentioned in my sermon a couple weeks ago, it's what's allowed this congregation to rebuild from fires and firestorms. Those of you who know the history here know it hasn't always been pleasant. We haven't always gotten along amicably together. But this congregation's done work to rebuild. So from fires and firestorms. And for making a difference in the parish, caring one for another, making this life of this congregation happen for the congregation, for the community, for supporting things like Family Kitchen, which don't happen without the foundation supported. If Trinity disappears tomorrow, Family Kitchen's right behind it. Maybe the community will step up. Maybe not. So you make a difference in the community. And as we learned a bit a couple of weeks ago at our Condega auction, as we'll learn and hear more next week, when Rick Negus is presenting, along with John Boland, when they're presenting on Condega, our trip earlier this year I should say, you'll begin to see a little bit of how we make a difference in the world. And the support for Condega doesn't happen without us. So we make a difference in the parish, in the community, and in the world. And your gift for 2016 will be absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. For at least 4 reasons. The first of which is we have a budget deficit gap that needs to get closed. Last year's deficit projected at $28,000, or this year's, I guess I should say, deficit projected at $28,000, only was as small as that because of some of the fund transfers which we could afford to do this year, and because of some of the special gifts that we received that we can't plan on, and because we did an extra little bit of a lighthearted summertime into giving is easy challenge grant. We don't necessarily plan to do any of those things next year. And we need to see the budget gap not grow. So that's going to be a challenge for 2016. And I would put it to you, we need to do better by our staff. In particular around the issue of health insurance. We don't live up to our own aspirations in that area. And if we provided them the kind of health insurance we ought to provide for Mark and for Jan, that would be a significant bump in our personnel costs. Because they should have the same kind of insurance that I am afforded. You're obliged to do it for me because that's how we began this whole thing with letters of agreement, diocesan expectations and all the rest, but they haven't had the same treatment, and they deserve no less. So I would love to see us do better there. And if we are to do more than survive for another year, but to thrive. The survival isn't enough. Really isn't. And finally, as we started at the beginning, we are to reap the harvest that God is offering. So that's what I have for you today. Those of you who are brave enough to come out.